What's up, nerds? It's Havoc. I'm back, dude. Today we're gonna go through the long overdue 2.0.5 tuning patch notes. Um, Obviously I've been gone for a bit, so I'm a little late coming back to this and getting this out. But I just wanted to share my insights and takes on the balance changes that came in 2.0.5. Um, as well as kind of like speak to directionally where I think things kind of need to continue to change, and kind of make some recommendations or suggestions. But basically, we're going to focus this on a patch breakdown, and talking about the changes and how it's going to apply to your gameplay, maybe how you guys need to change the way that you're playing on this patch compared to previous. So with that, we're just going to jump into, you can see here, focus on the general update, addressing multiplayer issues, including balance, heavy tanks, and new battle groups, faction adjustments. We've got a new map, or a refresh map, I should say, as well as some notes that will help provide context on design or balance intent. I think these are super important for us as a community to help understand the thought process behind some of these changes is critically important to, you know, coming in with a little bit more empathy to directionally like why certain changes are made or why things are done. And it also helps us kind of contextualize our own feedback back to the team so that, you know, if they're thinking about things a certain way, kind of helping to expand perspective by giving that and taking into account, the context in which they're making the changes. So, got some UI UX changes. That's great. Mignano Summit. I haven't played the 3v3 version of this map too much, but I do agree that there were a lot of small spaces, choke points that were very difficult to play in because you didn't have that extended piece of the map, like the 4v4 variant has. I do want to focus on the 1v1 map changes because a lot of these were feedback that came directly from the community. And I think like a lot of these changes are great. A lot of these changes I'm really happy about, and came from some direct feedback from me as well as a handful of other players to try to make the 1v1 pool a little bit more competitive and avoid players, vetoing maps out just because they're unbalanced or because they're uninteresting or unfun to play for one reason or another. So we'll focus on those. So for Angeville, I know they cleared the barbed wire and tank trap that was near the gate on the southern VP, which was great. Actually, while I'm doing this, I'm probably going to load up the game so I can pull this stuff up in the background and kind of explain what we're seeing. Oops. So, bigger changes came to Langres and Pacino, a little bit to Semois. We'll talk about these in a little bit more detail once I can pull the maps up here. But starting, actually start with Langres, I think. I want to speak to Langres specifically first. Just gonna highlight some quick things here, and then we'll move on to the notes themselves. So Langres, the main problem with Langres was how much the south side of the map was favored, largely to do with the safety of the path between the southern +10 fuel. You can see here, there's a lot of safety that comes from these buildings, as well as these cover positions, making a much safer retreat path from this +10 fuel point. There's also more fortifications that favor the south side here. And so to mitigate that, we passed along some feedback that this building should be pulled forward to kind of mirror the effects of these buildings on the center VP here. And also provide a safer retreat path behind this building back to the base so that it was kind of equally forgiving for both players to pull back from this area. This bush was also pulled forward to make it easier for units in this building to combat units coming from this direction, because it kind of provided that same effect in these two directions, which were not favoring the north side player. So those were like the fundamental changes, I think, all very good, making the left side of the map much more playable for the north side player, and more even overall. I think more balanced. So those are the core changes that came on Angeville. The other map that we had, I think, was, or sorry, not Angeville. That one's Langres. The other major change had to do with Pacino Stalemate. I've had Pacino Stalemate vetoed for a very long time because it's really uninteresting to me to play, or at least it was until these changes came in. And that had to do with the fuels primarily being concentrated on the north side of the map, made the south side pretty much inconsequential to play on, especially for the first like few minutes of the game. You can see here we've got the +10 fuels up here. This became the focal point. The game became really laney and focused on these two cutoffs between the north sides of the city area. And there was virtually no reason to focus on the south side because there's just less fuel available here previously, because this used to be a +5. So the ask was to upgrade these to +10s. That way both players have access to a safe +5 on each side. And then you actually get an interesting dynamic where, because the fuel distribution is even on both sides of the map, you get some nice flowing gameplay between both of these sides of the city rather than all focused on the north side. So I haven't played a ton of matches on this since, but I think it's a great change directionally. And I plan to play this map, and I think it will be a lot more fair in that sense. It also makes these cutoffs equally valuable on both sides. So playing for the cutoff, whether you're playing on the north side or the south side, is going to be valuable either way. So I think overall, like, this map is going to flow a lot better. It's going to make the center control much more interesting because you can flow between one side or the other, and less focused on the lane that is these two cutoff points here. So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight coming from the map changes specifically. Yeah, overall those were the most important thing. Let's see. Okay, so besides that, moving on beyond the maps, obviously some minor changes to some cutoff points that were broken, so that's a good fix. Long Stop Hill, Black Gold. I can't really speak to these because I haven't played them yet, to be fair. But I may have some feedback about those in the future. I want to focus on the balance stuff. That's really what we're all here for, right? So, crater change. I think overall this is probably a good thing. The field became pretty littered with craters over the course of a longer game with any kind of artillery, which made it pretty favorable for units, especially units with cloak, to play in. And so I think this change is overall a good thing. This I found pretty interesting. This deal 50% less damage upon detonating if the mine is detected. I kind of have mixed feelings about this. I understand why this was done. I actually think it has more to do with how butterfly bombs were being used, and how frustrating they were to kind of like dismantle with an engineer, especially when you have units that are shooting at them. I think it would have just made a lot more sense for them to disable the butterfly mines if they are detected by a sweeper, so that they could just be shot with no consequence to whatever units are around them. I don't really like this detected mines dealing less damage situation, because it kind of takes away from the interesting parts of potentially driving over a mine despite it being detected. And probably makes it a little bit too forgiving for players that are willing to drive over mines. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but again, I think I understand the rationale for doing it. The Stummel 75mm GMC and 221. The stun abilities were deemed too powerful on fast mobile units, would shut down vehicle attacks in range, remove their target's ability to escape danger. To address this, we're decreasing the debuff duration and maintaining vehicle speed, allowing affected vehicles to back out of the engagement. I have mixed feelings about this. I do think it pretty heavily impacts the viability of some of these abilities on different units, especially for the purpose of self-peel. For example, like the Stummel, being able to lock down, for example, a Humber that's diving it with the snare ability and then following it up with a Faust was like the greatest way to self-peel. Now with the lack of slow, it's going to make it much more difficult to use some of these units. And especially like the 221 scout car, because the turret on it is so finicky, it's going to make it much more difficult to survive some vehicle dives from, I would say, heavier caliber light vehicles like a Greyhound, a Humber, a Stuart, or a Chaffee. And so being able to like snare some of these vehicles was really the biggest benefit to these abilities. And now not having access to that and really just like disabling the weapons temporarily, it has me second guessing whether or not I want to use these units and especially these abilities. I also feel like I've noticed that the blinding shot ability does less damage than the standard GMC shot. That kind of has an impact on like the GMC and other vehicles' ability to kill units that they've snared, which I don't know. I don't really like. So I'd say overall, I can understand why this ability was changed. I think it was overkill. I think really the main thing that needed to be done was addressing the debuff duration. These abilities lasted a very long time. And now, you know, the lack of snare is, I think, snares need to be standardized. That's my opinion. The snares need to be standardized across the board. There's a mix of snares that last very long time. There are some snares that last a very short time, and there's really no way to kind of distinguish between them as a player unless you have like the really nuanced knowledge of somebody that's played thousands of games like I have. So I would have liked to just see the debuff duration probably reduced and everything else, you know, kept pretty much the same. That's what I would have preferred. But overall, I understand the change. Light artillery. So with adjustments, these units were underperforming, inability to retreat with high cost. So it seems to me like they tried to make the units a little bit more responsive, as well as, I guess, the responsiveness seemed to be the main thing, as well as rate of fire, as we can see here. I think they could have used a little bit more damage profile, specifically on the barrage. I would have liked to see the time between shots on the barrage and or the damage on barrage shells improved to make them feel much more like light artillery and less like mortars. And also to incentivize players to use barrage more than they're using like the attack move function, for example. So I think directionally, like a good change, but may not have been enough to make a lot of these units like as viable as I think they should be within the context of using them as light artillery. Now we get into the interesting stuff. So the field defenses, effectively, a lot of these times they brought down by about, what would you call this? A third. Which, to me, I already felt like, you know, that they had accomplished their mission of making field defenses more popular when they reduced the construction time overall and made it so that you cannot construct while capturing territory. I've come around to that change, and I'm actually a big fan of it now, because you have to be much more deliberate about the time that you spend constructing field defenses. But now, like, especially units with construction steroids like Coastal Battle Group, or Coastal Reserve Squads, I should say, I'm finding that, like, they're able to prop these defenses up too quickly, lock out really key areas in the map. They're able to build some of these in combat, which was something that I think they were trying to prevent with some of the previous patches and changes that they had made to construction. And now we're kind of like right back there. So I'm not super happy with the timing changes or the time investment on the field defenses. I do understand like the rationale, but again, I just think it was too much. I really think like the construction times were in a pretty good spot where they were, and now it's almost too easy to find opportunities to put these defenses up, and you don't really have to consider like, am I under threat of being jumped on by an enemy squad while I'm trying to put these up? Usually you can get them up even when you're very close or actively engaged in combat, especially coastal squads. And it's too easy to put these things up. So I think this needs to change. I think these changes need to be reverted largely. Air Support Center. This is kind of hilarious that they did this by accident. The Air Supremacy upgrade. And took away air supply. Air supply was probably one of the most important upgrades for ASC because USF is such a munitions heavy faction. So I was happy to see this change. Tank Depot definitely was in desperate need of a fuel cost reduction. It was the most expensive tech structure by far, and I think this was warranted. The quarter ton scout upgrade. I think this is good because it brings it in line with the other detector units. However, I would still like to see some kind of counterplay to these detector units, maybe making it like an ability, like a timed ability with a cost, or making it so that these units can be detected back when they're in detector mode, so that you can kind of like counter battery them, or identify where the recon ability is coming from, and as the opposing player you can try to make a play to take out these units, because right now it's a lot of like getting recon upgrades that are very side tech adjacent, very easy to access, and don't require a lot of investment from the players that are benefiting from them. And they are super powerful because not only do they detect units in the fog, but they can also detect unit types and the movement of those units. So for such a cheap unit, these are very, very powerful capabilities. And I just think there needs to be more counterplay added to them. I was pretty disappointed to see the changes to the 30 cal or the 50 cal. I still think that this unit should not have innate damage reduction. I think that's a huge problem, especially for an early game unit. I'm pretty disappointed with this. I directionally, like, it's the right thing, but I don't think it's enough. I think they need to have their damage reduction removed from the innate, and then maybe put the vet 1 back to 10%, so they get 10% best case scenario by vet 1, and that's it. But I think any more damage reduction than that, it's stacking up too much and making these units way too difficult to punish and kill, and it's a part of the reason that we're seeing a lot of this like weapon support center heavy play, especially at higher levels. The 81mm mortar change, specifically to airburst. I've been playing with this a fair bit now, and I'm not a fan of this change. I think the scatter makes it too RNG focused. I do think the main problem with this was that it was too strong, but it had more to do with the cost of the ability than the performance of it. Yes, it was very strong, but I think like you just need to have the player commit more resources to get the same value. You do want to be able to like wipe units or wipe team weapons that are staying within an area. Now it's like there's really no guarantee that you're going to get value out of one of these barrages. I'm seeing a lot of them kind of like hit the squad and then miss it, and then maybe hit it again and then miss it again. And so if you're committing to like an ability like this, the RNG on it is just really unhelpful. And I think this needs to be reverted back to its previous performance. Maybe a little bit more scatter because it was pretty precise, but this is too much, in my opinion. Yeah, so I think this needs to be reverted, and then maybe increase the cost, because it's currently 20 munitions to use this airburst ability. Increasing it to be a little bit more expensive than a grenade, say maybe like 30 or 35. Would be, I think, a lot better way to nerf the performance of this while still keeping the value. The motor pool change was interesting. I'm actually happy to see this. I do think motor pool needed to be more accessible. What I would personally like to see is I would like people to be able to build the motor pool without having selected their support center yet. This will give players more options to decide which support center they want to use, and it will give them earlier access to the anti-tank gun, which I think is pretty important for USF. It can be difficult to play with Zooks and the current state of the GMC, but I have seen a lot of players like make good use out of it anyways, and I think it is impacting pretty heavily the viability of some rifle-based compositions, especially in larger team games. I also know that in team games, like, motor pool access is kind of a frustrating thing for US players currently. So making this easier to access and allowing players to build this structure and the AT guns before they select a support center would be a nice change. I would just make it so that they must purchase a support center in order to build one of the vehicles from the motor pool. That to me makes the most sense. And getting access to the anti-tank gun earlier, if it's a priority and you want to invest the fuel in it, should be something that the US players are allowed to do. Next, reset the thing here. Look like we're going up to Greyhound. Greyhound, yeah, fuel costs reduced. I think this is generally fine. Armored skirts and 50 cal upgrade time reduced. I think this is fine as well. I still have major concerns about Armored Battle Group specifically. I have some thoughts about Armored Battle Group. I really think that they should make the Easy 8 mutually exclusive with Allied War Machine. I think Allied War Machine should only apply to Tier 4 vehicles to avoid motor pool spam. There are some pretty crazy tempo plays that you can make with War Machine combined with heavy motor pool investment that just make it insurmountable advantages for the US player to try to deal with. So I'm okay with this change generally speaking, but in the context of Armored Battle Group, I'm not really a fan. But overall, I think this is good. It's more in line with the value of the Greyhound as a vehicle in its current state. The Hellcat. Hellcat was in a really weird spot and was having a lot of issues, I think. I think we probably need to see some other changes or capabilities maybe added to the Hellcat. The range is something people have talked about quite a bit, but I think directionally, all of these changes are fantastic and exactly what the Hellcat needed. It did need a reduced fire aim time because there were a lot of times you were acquiring a target with the Hellcat and then it would disappear right at the last second before the Hellcat could get the shot off. This is going to alleviate some of that pain. The acceleration bonus being replaced with accuracy is also fantastic. The Hellcat really struggled to hit, especially some of the smaller vehicles, which was part of the problems that it had. And the accuracy bonus is great. And then the penetration bonus at Vet 3 makes perfect sense to me. It'll make keeping your Hellcats alive a much more valuable thing. And able to better trade with some of those late game cats that have the heavy armor. The M18s will be able to handily manage those with the penetration bonus that they're getting. And then I think the shoot and scoot duration, getting an extra couple seconds on it is really nice. It's going to allow you to extend that gap if you're trying to kite away from an opponent or close it and potentially get on a flank if you're trying to be aggressive with it. So I think it will make shoot and scoot a much more attractive option considering some of the late game bonuses that you get with the penetration now over HVAP. So I think it'll make both veterancy options more interesting. And then the penetration bonus will increase the viability of this unit going into the late game. I was a little surprised to see dozer buffs. I don't really feel like this thing has any major issues right now. I think it's quite strong. I prefer using it over something like the Brumbar. Brumbar is a little bit more finicky to use, even though it's more heavily armored and hits a little bit harder. I do like the dozer better. The machine guns on it are fantastic. The dozer blade, nice quality of life upgrade, I would say. So I can see that being added in there, but the fire rate bonus, I don't really understand. I don't really feel like it was necessary. I feel like the fire rate on it was probably strong enough, but maybe they wanted to make the later veterancy levels feel even more powerful. And so I can kind of understand that in this case. Next, we've got the Artillery Observer Squad. This has been really interesting. I've played a lot of games against Pax, who is he is a connoisseur of this squad now. They're very strong with this upgrade, and the mortar barrages that come down from these beacons are quite strong, and it's a lot cheaper than paying for a mortar itself, and it's also a lot more threatening. So going for a few of these squads and then doing the beacon supervise is really, really nice way to get extra value out of this battle group and specifically this selection, making it a little bit more appealing over the ammunition storage. So this is a nice change. I like it. Ammunition storage. Overall, I'm happy with the change here. I do think this was too powerful. The aura range being decreased makes perfect sense to me. However, I have highlighted this on my streams and some other videos. You can place the howitzer on like the very edge of the radius and it will still get the benefit, even if it's just like touching it with the corner. And so it kind of negates the aura change that they've done. I think what they also probably need to do is bring the howitzer into the force players to bring the howitzer into the circle in order to get the benefit rather than just touching it. So yeah, designate assault position change. I actually thought this ability was fine. I don't really feel like it needs a cost reduction, but you know, maybe they weren't seeing a lot of selection of this over the medical tent, which I can completely understand, especially for team games. But yeah, I think this is probably overkill, kind of unnecessary. Weapon crate drop no longer has a recharge time. That's totally fine to me, considering if you want to like stockpile munitions so that you can upgrade your first ranger, your first couple of rangers with a lot of weapons. If you have the munitions, makes perfect sense. The 3-inch, yeah, the artillery on this ability was pretty terrible. I have tested this. It feels much better now. It feels much more responsive. It feels much more worth paying munitions for. I actually think the munitions cost should be slightly reduced to make this more usable as a light artillery weapon. But overall, like all of these changes, very good for the barrage on the 3-inch gun and much more worthwhile to use now, whereas before it was like I tested it out and then it wasn't very good. So now much more interesting. The Pershing, I actually haven't seen a lot of this because of the CP cost increase. I also think players just like have been favoring other battle groups and other parts. Maybe the novelty of the battle group is worn off. I'm not really sure, but this was a very necessary change. This thing got veterancy way too fast. I was seeing it get to like vet 3 oftentimes before an equivalent heavy tank like a Tiger or a KT would get to vet 1, which is crazy. Obviously, like, you know, the fact that it's super fast and deals a lot of damage, I think plays into that as well. But overall, really happy with the change on the Pershing. Gonna go a little bit faster here. So medical station, I think this is a welcome change. However, I think it should have a fuel cost. 15 fuel is probably too... I actually feel like it wasn't 15. I feel like it was more. This seems like gaslighting to me. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was like at least 20 fuel previously. But I think this should have a fuel cost, maybe like 10, and then increase the radius of the healing so you can have more healing inside of your base. But overall, this is a very welcome change. PGs, I've been yapping about PGs needing accuracy for a very long time. I think this is a good start, but frankly, I do think they need more accuracy at the mid-veterancy levels rather than all of the accuracy that they get going to vet 3. So directionally a good change, but I still don't think PGs are quite where they need to be in terms of their performance for their cost. Jaeger squad, this is a great change to make the Panzerschrecks less oppressive to deal with, especially with machine guns. Now you can properly lock them down. So overall, I'm really happy with this change for Jaeger squads. I would like to see something making the G43, or basically like trying to use them in the anti-infantry role, a little bit more interesting. But for now, this is a great change toward the Jaeger squad. Directionally what they need, sure. MP40 buffs. I was a little like taken aback by this. I was a little worried about this, but I actually think it's fine after playing with it quite a bit. Grenadiers are still very squishy units. And you know, against some of the later game squads, like once riflemen or sections hit vet 1 or vet 2, I should say, these guys really aren't a threat to them anymore, but they do make for a nice early game for breakthrough. So overall, I think this is good. Aura range increase, I think, was a great thing for the Panzer IV. Both command tank variants needed this. It was too difficult to get the bonuses from the aura prior to this update, so I'm really happy to see that these units can be used more from a safe distance because they are support units. They're not very beefy or not very lethal, so they're much better sitting into their support role with this increase in radius. I was really scratching my head at this. I don't really understand why the DPS curve on the MG15 is flat. This thing is now better than the Bren gun, which I don't really understand considering the Bren gun is more expensive and actually goes on a line unit. I understand they want to make this a more appealing option over the grenade launcher, but I just feel like this is probably overkill in terms of how much of a bonus it's going to get. So I think, yeah, probably overtuned. Maybe needed to be like a little bit less accuracy at close range or at long range, but like it needs discernible weaknesses because right now I've heard a lot of players complaining about the spam of these units, and we don't need to incentivize more Falchion Pioneer spam for a different reason, I think. Coastal Reserve Squad, I do not think that they needed the capture speed increase. That's the main issue that I have with this. They already provide quite a bit of tempo due to the fact that they're 240, so they're a bit cheaper than Grenadiers, and they actually perform better in combat. This is fine. To me, this is just an oversight and a quality of life change that needed to be done. But overall, I don't think that they needed more capture speed, because right now I've seen a lot of like really heavy coastal builds that give way too much tempo. And the way to prevent that was by having them capture territory a little bit slower. And now that's basically, there's no reason not to use these now if you're selecting Coastal Battle Group. And just basically spamming this out instead of building tier 1, because you'll just get way more tempo than your opponent. You'll be able to field way more units and kind of flood them out and then take control of the map really quickly and get a quick transition to your mid-game armor that you usually want for coastal-based builds, because they can't be very aggressive. So not a fan of this, but overall, you know, I think this is fine. This is a necessary change. Heavy gunnery, I still think it's really weird that this is a global cooldown. I think that there's probably like, I think the 221 should probably not have access to this, and then they could make it a little bit more powerful. Because the 221 is really like the big problem unit when it comes to this, I would say. And so now, you know, I think they'll have lost it here. Right, heavy gunnery. Yeah, I don't really understand why this was on a global cooldown. It doesn't really make sense to me. Machine gun camo, directionally a good change, but again, I think most of this should be tied to the player should have to commit to a position in order to get the benefits of the ambush bonus and the camo, and therefore I think the camo should only apply when the machine gun is set up. However, this is a little bit less oppressive. Like I've seen now players, they're able to catch units properly when darting between cover, and you know, being able to intercept them before the camo activates. All good things, I think. So reduced in power, but still kind of frustrating to play against. I would like to see the player be forced to commit to a position and setting up the machine gun in order to get that ambush bonus. V1 Rocket Strike, good. King Tiger change, I think this is good. I actually still haven't seen quite very much of this unit. I think just maybe because it's very susceptible to airstrikes, especially. Anytime I'm playing against a KT, I'm generally going for the P-47 strafe, and it's still very difficult for this thing to maneuver out, albeit less difficult because it was having that issue with the reverse speed that's since been corrected. But overall, I think maybe we'll see more of this unit, and hopefully, you know, I think players will feel a little bit better. Especially once you get Vet 1, the extra effective health that's going to give you will be really nice. Make the KT feel a little bit more beefy and distinct from the regular Tiger. Forward Observer Barrage, a totally necessary change. I think this is in a completely fine position now. Really happy with this overall. This is way too spammable, especially with the Canadian battle group and access to the munition surplus ability. So overall, really happy with that. Centaur, speed increase is nice, but I still think this unit needs something distinguishing it from a regular Crusader. Since it's coming out at tier 4, I just still see no real effective, or no way that this unit is going to be more useful than getting something like a Crusader or a Matilda. So maybe it needs just further distinction in a role, or maybe given some supporting abilities that will make it more interesting choice over the other tier 4 standard options. Crusader 2 tank, near penetration reduced from 100 to 90. This is probably good because the 2-pounder, I've been saying for a long time, is too effective against medium armor. I think you should be forced to commit a little bit more resources in order to get the gun upgrade, so that you're actually selecting the distinct role for the Crusader of dedicating it to anti-armor. Over, you know, getting the benefits of both the fast-firing 2-pounder gun, which is effective against infantry, and then just being able to very easily flank enemy tanks and penetrate them anyways, even though you're not using the 6-pounder upgrade. Now I think players will be a little bit more incentivized to do this. I really think the problem with the Crusader punching above its weight has to do with the rate of fire that it gets from heroic charge. It already gets some rate of fire bonuses from armor training, which is fine, but I think heroic charge probably needs to be nerfed so that it's focused mostly on speed and acceleration on the unit rather than rate of fire, and I think that needs to be changed to make the Crusader balanced. Because right now, to date, I think it's still the most effective, cost-effective tank in the game, and very spammable still. So I think changing that heroic charge will make it so that the UKF player really needs to think about transitioning into late game tanks versus just spamming these bad boys out and being able to punch way above their weight with just numbers. The bishop change, this is good, definitely necessary. I still think the bishop is quite a bit more attractive and strong compared to some of the other counterpart weapons or counterpart SPGs, specifically the Wesp. The Stuka is still in quite a strong place, and I have some thoughts about that. We'll get to that when we talk about that. Gurkha rifle section. This is a nice quality of life upgrade for the Gurkhas. I think they're still quite good and attractive as a unit, but I don't know if maybe this battle group fell off in popularity. I know a lot of people feel like it's kind of the weakest UKF battle group right now. I'm not really sure I buy that. But this is a really nice quality of life change. I'm for giving units more capabilities, more distinction. And I think that'll be good for Gurkhas overall. We'll probably see more of them because of it. Now moving on to Aaron C. Aaron C, commando section. Been asking this for a long time, so really happy about this. They finally get access to the stealth demo charge that the SSF commandos can build. And I'm actually really happy with the state that commandos are in now. I actually think they're worth their cost with the changes to demo charges. Feel pretty good about their combat capabilities. So really happy about this overall. Attacking spirit, I think this is good nerf, but I also think munition surplus needs a nerf. I think it should only apply to one ability that the section can use for free. The sections are still in a place where they can use the forward observer barrage, they can use a rifle grenade, and they can throw a snare all for free as long as they have the munition surplus upgrade. And I just think that's too powerful. There's too many things that they're given for free, and it should probably be nerfed alongside attacking spirit to make both of these options equally fair and attractive. Burnout, I still can't really speak for this because I haven't really been using this very much, but I understand it was frustrating to play against in team games. Maybe this will, increasing its accessibility will make it a more appealing option over the incendiary munitions. I'm personally an advocate for the incendiary munitions. I think the value on them is just way too good to give up. So overall, really happy about the change over burnout. I think it will make it an appealing option. Point assault, to this day, I still have not used in a live game. I've tested it like in skirmish mode and stuff, but I just haven't seen the value from it. Maybe this will make it a more popular option. But again, I still think the smoke barrage is just way more appealing. It has way more utility in the game and complements Canadian Battle Group much better. So overall, probably a good change directionally. We'll have to see how it shakes up. This change to the Croc is great. It had a big problem with dealing with big swaths of infantry, and now that it has an actual area of effect as opposed to just dealing damage in a line on the flamethrower, well, I think make it much stronger. I actually haven't had the chance to use this that much. I've called it in maybe twice on this patch, but I'm much happier with the infantry performance, especially in combination with the pyrotechnics ability. It's much better at kiting infantry and dealing with blobs than it was on last patch, where with enough Jägerschrecks, you could bully out this thing anyways. And now it's much more difficult to pull that off because of the area effect damage for the Crocs. So this is a good change. Very good. Very welcome. 8 rad change. This is good, but I don't think it was enough. I still feel like the 8 rad is too easily countered by pretty much everything in the allied roster, and for the timing that it comes out. Soft loses to the Greyhound, loses hard to the Stuart, loses hard to the Chaffee. I can't find a good way to fit this into a build. I'm still finding myself favoring the Flak Veerling pretty significantly. And even for its cost, like the damage that it does is just not comparable to the Flak. The Flak is just way better between the area of effect and the suppression capabilities. And also the timing of the flak coming out slightly before the 8 rad. I just don't think that this is a viable option right now. It does need some buffs, and it's good to see that they recognize that, but I think it needs more than what we're seeing here. P3 near penetration reduced. This is a good thing. I think P3 swarms were pretty scary, especially to the heavier tanks. There should be more emphasis on getting access to the side armor and the rear armor rather than trying to face hug whatever heavy tanks that you're fighting. And this is going to help incentivize that correct behavior from the P3s. So this is totally fine, I think. More focus on flanking rather than addressing head-on. Simavente, barrage near damage increase. I actually think the Simavente is in a pretty good spot right now. I've seen a lot of players using a large volume of these, especially with the cost reduction. They're quite cost effective as like a light artillery unit / light AT. And because they have a fixed penetration at all ranges, they actually trade really well with like Shermans and other medium vehicles. So I think the Simavente is in a pretty good spot. Bersaglieri builds, outscaling other standard infantry builds, which is not the intention. They're expected to be a more tempo-based unit for the early game favored, and increasing the experience is a good way to do that. I do think they could probably use like a bit of a reduction in their sprint passive, maybe 30% speed instead of 40, but this is a step in the right direction. Bersaglieri definitely needed something nerfed, but this might be overkill. This strafing run, I've been complaining about being completely useless for a very long time. These are some great buffs to it. I've seen it in game now. It seems like a much more attractive option. And I actually find myself using it over covering artillery, whereas before I was saying to players, like, just skip over this completely, don't use it, save for artillery cover instead. Now you've actually got like a nice strafe ability that gives the player everything that they need to deal with like a concentrated threat in like a road or a lane. It's a really nice ability now, so happy about that buff. Italian infantry, Guastatori squad, combat effectiveness increased. They really needed this. Not much more to say about this, but they're trading much better at short range as I would expect them to for their cost. So happy about this change overall. Booby traps still haven't used despite them being having their costs reduced. I think the value of the prepared positions, which gives the damage resistance to DAC team weapons, is just way more attractive. And so I haven't been using this. Sound the alarm duration increase I think is nice. I've tested this a little bit. I'm actually pretty happy with the ability. I think it's an effective ability, and maybe a little bit of like a cost reduction over a duration increase is what I would have favored. But overall, I think this is a good change. Propaganda war, I still don't really see this as appealing. The late game artillery strike is way better than this. Especially now since you can't force the retreat on team weapons like you used to be able to. I think it's just not a competitive option compared to the alternative. Stuka anti-tank loader, I think this is probably too weak for what it costs right now, despite the cost reduction. But overall, you know, directionally, they recognize that it needs some more buffs, so that's great. Vehicle awareness, the duration increased. Always detects units in the radius, no longer pulses. I think this is good overall. Range increase from 60 to 90. I think that actually this will make this option appealing over the vehicle salvage, which I think most people were selecting. And I've tried this out a little bit. It feels pretty good. DAC has like some other good recon sources through the 254 and stuff, but this has been kind of a nice change. And I'm looking forward to experimenting with this a little bit more. Aura change on the command panzer, same as the breakthrough panzer commander, so good to see that. Firestorm munition cost reduction, yeah, this ability was a bit too expensive. Subterfuge beacon, fine overall. Operation Scorpion, I actually don't like this. I don't think that you should be able to cloak all of your tanks and drive them at full speed. I think there should be some kind of drawback to using the cloak, and I think the slow is fine. Munition cost reduction would have made a little bit more sense to me. And I actually don't have a problem with this ability. I think it's completely fine. I think that the resource recoup that you get after popping it is really nice as well. And so I think I think this is probably a bit overkill as a buff for Operation Scorpion. I think the munition cost reduction would have been completely sufficient. Panzerjäger command, the roadblocks getting more health was probably fine. Decreasing the build time, you guys already know how I feel about this. I think the 9-second build time was probably fine. S-Minefields a lot less effective than they were on the last patch. I'm not really a huge fan of building these as much as I was. But I mean, this is probably fair because we were seeing a lot of like units just getting wiped by hitting 3 mines at the same time, and that can be really frustrating on the player side. So it's probably better that they did this nerf. Butterfly mines, I still don't understand why they're letting people drop these in the fog of war. I really think that was the most toxic thing about them. I don't really think it was the damage that was a problem. As well as the model limit. I don't think that had anything to do with it at all. I think it mostly has to do with the being able to drop it in the fog as being the main issue. Elephant, it needed buffs. It got some buffs. I still don't think it's enough. It's just not attractive compared to like the Tiger as an alternative option. It might make sense to weave into a tier 2.5 heavy build as a heavy TD. But given the maneuverability on this thing and the damage, I don't know. I do think that the damage needs to be increased a little bit further, maybe to around 300, so that you can really threaten some of the lighter vehicles with like a 2-shot kill. Yeah, because right now, I mean, having infinite penetration, pretty cool. You know, guaranteed penetration on hit. I was having a lot of issues with this thing missing vehicles that it was targeting. So maybe the accuracy is something that needs to be looked at. Reload speed being sped up is really nice as well. But I don't know. I think this is going to require a little bit more testing from me. I've used it once since the patch, and I wasn't really overwhelmed, or I was kind of underwhelmed with its performance for its cost. So I think more damage is probably the answer, so it can 3-tap some of these heavier vehicles like the EZ8 and the Grant. Because right now, I don't think it can do that. Actually, let me just do some quick math. It was 280 times 3. Oh, it is 840. Okay, so it actually does 3-tap some of those vehicles. So maybe it's in a good spot. I didn't get great results with it the one game that I used it. So yeah, being able to 3-tap some of these heavier mediums is actually really nice. Maybe it'll be worthwhile choice over the Tiger. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's the overview of the patch notes. Overall, I think directionally a good patch, but I think there's a lot more work to do. I've been, passing some feedback along based on like my own opinions about things, but obviously like what the devs do is totally their prerogative, and they have access to data and reasons for things that I can't see. I don't know, maybe I'll publish like a public or like an open letter, or like a public version of like what balance changes I think should be made. But I mean, you guys know me, like if you watch me play, I pretty much favor all factions equally. I want more strategic viability, more strategic diversity. And I think there's a lot of units and abilities that have kind of been left in the dust as well and kind of forgotten about, that I would like to see brought into the metafold. But I think we're in a pretty good place. Like we're eating pretty good in terms of meta, in terms of unit diversity. There's not as many toxic behaviors when it comes to rewarding low effort, high reward gameplay, except maybe for GRB blobs, which still need to be absolutely roasted, hopefully on the next patch. We'll see. But yeah, overall happy with the direction of the patch and looking forward to seeing what's going to come next from these guys in the summer with 2.1. So curious to hear your thoughts about the balance. Curious, I'm sure there's lots of you that have had more games on this patch than I have now. I've only been back for just over a week now, and so I haven't got as many games in as I normally would. But we'll have lots to say, I think, when 2.1 releases, and we'll be jamming the games in. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope you learned something from it, and catch you nerds on the next one.